So today I want to talk about the primer. So this is the week of lectures. I don't quite being in the way of the board. This is the week of lectures that's going to take place in June. So we have some sketch of the lectures that's up on the webpage. I posted a link to that in the Discord. So I want to talk through what the overall aim of the primer is, and then get your input on the precise plan and try and get that to more of a detailed plan so that we can all start working on our parts of it.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
if you click the boards only mode, you can stand behind the wall.
That's right. Yeah, thanks. Let's see. Cool. No. Oh, it's switched. What? That's weird. I feel like it's gone into the following me around.
The board's only not working.
I feel like it's gone. Yeah, now it's in some weird in between state where it's. Yeah, this is what was happening before. Like, what is it doing right now? It's not following me.
Oh. I think it's because the audience mode is on.
No, audience mode is not on. See, now it should just
really?
like not do anything, right? Because I turned on boards only and then I walked up. Yeah, anyway, yeah, now it's following me. Okay. Just look at the board. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies.
No. It's rough edges expected when you improve things. Maybe let me try this.
Can you try disconnecting and reattaching to see if that'll...
Yeah, I'll try it. Still, it's got this particular view with the double board option, the only thing selected. Sorry, Susan, maybe can you step back a little bit? You weren't too close, but the orb... Yeah, thanks. Okay. So what's the aim of the primer? So there's a plenty good introduction to SLT in the grey and green books for a mathematically sophisticated audience who's willing to sit down and read through both of those books. But that doesn't describe all the people who might be interested in SLT. I think somebody should maybe mute their microphone. So I think the primer should aim to be the canonical introduction to SLT as an area of mathematical science. And this is not a term that I would usually use, but Watanabe, I got an email from him the other day, thanks to Xiaowei, who introduced us. And he referred to his hope that there could be more bridges between mathematics and mathematical science. And when I look up this term, so people use mathematical science to mean areas which are primarily mathematical but not usually considered part of mathematics. So theoretical physics, for example, or theoretical areas of biology, or mathematical geophysics. There are lots of areas that are mathematical but not pure mathematics, or not even really applied mathematics exactly. And I think that's a good description of the kind of audience we want to reach with the primer. So the intended audience is mathematically sophisticated, but we expect them to come from fields other than pure mathematics. So, for example, alignment is the audience of particular interest in June, but I think we should prepare this primer with an aim to giving it multiple times. So this should be something that exists online in some form or another in terms of recordings and lecture notes, but we could also imagine that every 6 months or so we would run this again, and maybe it would have a slightly different tint depending on who's interested, but I don't think we should overwhelmingly bias it in favor of alignment, just in terms of trying to get the most bang for our buck in terms of preparation. Okay. Well, let's discuss that first of all. Does that seem like a reasonable framing, or any comments on that? Thumbs up. All right, then I will charge ahead. Okay, so that's not an easy task, right? So there's definitely a gap in terms of onboarding people into SLT, even if they're interested in only pure mathematics. And it's especially maybe difficult if we're trying to reach a broader audience. Maybe we can go through a few examples of who those other audiences might be after we've discussed the sort of general outline of the primer. The way I've divided it up currently is into 3 tracks: SLT high, SLT low, and physics. SLT high is meant to be, that is not right. Let's see. Yeah. It's meant to be the high level picture. So what's true and how to use it to reason about learning machines. And that's kind of the takeaway, right? So we should hope that everybody leaves the primer understanding things like the free energy formula, how to think about model selection, or the various things that are similar to model selection in terms of energy and entropy, the kind of high-level story that would allow you to not be confused by some of the more incorrect views on what's going on in these kinds of systems and so on. So we want people to take that away from the primer. And in addition, we want another track, SLT low, which is the details. But of course, we don't have time to go into all the proofs. So this is not meant to be like a speed run through, the grey book, for example. That's not really in scope, although it might be fun. So it's going to be tricky to choose exactly what to put in there. To give you an idea, on the current schedule, there's 5 hours for SLT high and 5 hours for SLT low. So that gives you an idea of how bounded we are in terms of how many details we can put in. There's also a question of what details people actually care about, right? There's 2 other tracks in the current primer. There's a physics track and an alignment track that will have an introduction to alignment and mechanistic interpretability. I don't propose to talk about the latter track today. That's, I think, up to Alexander and Jesse and maybe Zach and others to prepare. The physics track, I also don't feel we need to get into too much. I've currently assigned Jesse to give a bunch of those talks. And I think my friend Colleen might give one of them as well. The aim of that track is to... there's lots of useful analogies, as we've seen in other talks in this seminar, between statistical physics and statistical learning, and those are good things to know. I don't propose to center the physical analogies in the high or low tracks necessarily. This is something we can discuss, but Edmund and I talked about a little bit. I think we should probably stick to talking about the Bayesian posterior rather than always saying the Boltzmann distribution and things like that. So I think it's fair to bring in terms like energy and thermodynamical concepts and the Boltzmann distribution and partition functions and all that where they're useful. But I think we probably want to stick to the mathematical language simply because that's what's in the grey and green books, and that seems like a good things to center as objects. Okay, any questions about the overall structure that's been outlined here? Okay. Yeah, so as you may have noticed, there are a few different things you kind of need to know to really understand SLT. And it's not easy to know all of them. And maybe we can't shove it all into 5 hours or 10 hours. So exactly what to take for granted and what not to take for granted is part of the challenge of preparing this. And what to introduce and what not to introduce. So for example, on the current schedule, there's a full hour dedicated to algebraic geometry. Is that really necessary? like, what do we take as black boxes and just kind of say, yeah, right, you can resolve singularities, and what do we really explain? So I think to answer that question, one needs to sort of settle what the high-level goals are in terms of what is the message that we want people to take away from the primer, what tools do we want them to have in their heads. And so, let's see. Here's where I would invite your input, high-level concepts. So the thing I've currently put forward as being the thing we should focus on as the central insight is the free energy formula, by which, and this is how I'm referring to the asymptotic expansion of the free energy. So the expression in terms of, right, so and phases and phase transitions. I think it's not perfect, partly because we just, there are other parts of the story we understand much better than phases and phase transitions, right? So it might be a bit premature to center them. If this was purely for a mathematical audience, I wouldn't choose this. On the other hand, I think we have the risk of going down a lot of distracting blind alleys if we, so I mean there are other things we could take as the central point, right? So we could talk about how singular learning theory addresses or does not address the puzzle that neural networks can generalize even though they're over-parameterized. But then we get into all sorts of thorny issues about SGD versus the posterior, and so we want to try and avoid the central message being hamstrung by a lot of these open questions, right? And I think the advantage of the free energy formula, for one thing, we know that's true, and under some mild hypotheses it holds, even if the model isn't realizable, and we have pretty good reason to think that it affects learning beyond just the set of true parameters. The story with phases and phase transitions is less settled, maybe be more settled by June, we'll see. But it does seem to me much more robust in the sense that, for example, somebody coming from alignment knows from the existing literature that phases and phase transitions seem to and play a deep role in the context of emergent capabilities. We've talked about this in the seminar before. I think this is a sensible place to advertise SLT as being just natively the right theory, given its link to singularity theory and critical phenomena and so on. It's very hard to imagine that there is any theory of how these phenomena work in learning machines that doesn't look something like SLT or have a lot of overlap with it. But in the case of like generalization, there are alternative theories that might explain some of that are sort of competing with SLT. And I think we should talk in the week about the relative merits and demerits of the different approaches, but I'd sort of like the big picture to really be pushing forward something that's kind of mathematically well defended and clearly a selling point of SLT. But yeah, I'll pause here and see if any of you have comments about that.
It seems like we should talk about, the Bayesian generalization error results, the Gibbs generalization error results, even if that is not directly related to what people in deep learning, call the generalization puzzle. That should still probably be something central.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying that I think the central storyline in, say, the Grey Book is a good one, and I think we should talk about all of these quantities and the equations of state and all that. But in terms of if we want there to be a clear message, there has to be some central thing, and I would argue that it's the free energy formula that we want people to really get. Would you think that that's? Would you argue with that?
Yeah, no, I think that is at least from my point of view as a statistician, that is interesting because it tells me a lot about how the posterior distribution behaves. Yeah.
Edmund, any comments?
Yeah, I agree.
I can't hear you. Sorry, maybe you can move closer to the orb.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I agree that the free energy formula should be central, not just for the information it gives about the Bayesian posterior, but also the behavior of the loss in sort of neighborhood of local minima. I think the message of geometry, the huge influence of geometry to the behavior of the model in those neighborhoods is a key message here.
Yeah. Okay, so that's at the top of the page, but let's fill in the page with more stuff. So some of you are giving talks. We need to fit all these things together into some sort of coherent story over the week. What else? What are the things that somebody coming away from a week-long introduction to SLT ought to know?
Something that occurs to me, sorry about the wind, is why a singularity corresponds to knowledge, or like what singularity has anything to do with knowledge, because that wasn't something I'd ever heard of before.
Yep, slogans are good. I think something Edmund said, which is, if you want hooks, slogans like this are good hooks. This is an excellent one, I think, explaining what this means. Also excellent hooks are myths, so things that sort of many people believe, that once you understand SLT, you see through them. So I guess that's another, what's an obvious one?
Regular models, maybe?
Yeah.
The example I usually give is kind of like it's related to the generalization puzzle that and in the usual formulation of a generalization puzzle, the puzzle is that the model capacity grows, but your generalization error empirically doesn't grow. But that's assuming that it doesn't depend on the truth, on the true distribution.
Yeah.
And that is true in regular models, but once you have singular models, that's just not true.
Yeah, I think another important one, and counterintuitive, is that Yeah, so when you first hear the term singular learning theory and you ask why singular, and then somebody tells you about singularities, it seems from experience talking to people that have a more statistical background that maybe it's a bit surprising that something that's like a measure zero set and maybe not even your true parameter, right? Even if your true parameter is regular, singularities in the model affect the learning process. So this kind of global influence of singularities and how that works is an obvious thing to try and give people intuition for, so that it moves from something very surprising to something that seems extremely natural. I don't know, I mean, I think I can tell that story in 4 hours, but I don't know how to do it in 1 hour. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces from physics and other places that go into my intuitions for not being surprised by that. But I think that's one of the challenges to try and condense that story. Yeah, let's see. Okay, let's add a few others and then we can talk about the different tracks. Let me take a look at the current schedule and see if I've missed anything important. So the current SLT high has phases, free energy formula, phase transitions, intuition for the RLCT, volume codimension, myths, SGD is not Langevin, flatness, landscape, complex versus simple. Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting one, right? Yeah, maybe we can put here meaning of the RLCT. Because this has lots of subtleties, right? And just the definition doesn't really tell you much. Getting people to have in their heads the relation between, like, what does it mean for there to be more directions in the set of true parameters, the relation between the RLCT and the number of normal directions, volume codimension, the kind of view from the WBIC paper that as you change the inverse temperature, you're going to get a change in the expected value of the loss, and all that feeds into having a sort of robust view of what the RLCT means. And I think that's something we want people to come away with as well. So it's not... There's a risk of overemphasizing the algebraic geometry, right? Which, if you just give the definitions, is inevitable. I think Alexander made this point several times, where you can make it look like you need to know a lot of algebraic geometry to get anything out of SLT, because, well, there's this fundamental quantity which is the RLCT, and then you've got to go learn resolution of singularities and all that. But if you have these other points of view, you realize you don't really need to understand resolution of singularities to see what this quantity is saying. In order to compute it, you might. So I think demystifying the RLCT is probably another important aim. Okay, what else is on the list? Well, I guess the low road has introductions to various stuff. Yeah, more phase transitions, density of states. Yeah, honestly, I don't know how much to say about density of states. And how central to put it.
Shouldn't that be lumped into the understanding, not RLCT, but just the general, how it relates to the geometry, what density of states and RLCT tells about the geometry?
Yeah, I guess it's a question for me whether it belongs on the high road or just on the low road. It's clearly going to come up on the low road, but I suppose I wouldn't necessarily be advertising the density of, well, yeah, I don't know. For someone with a physics background, maybe it's a very natural thing to bring up early. But I tend to think that for the audience we'll have, maybe it's not. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can come back to that question. Okay. Yeah, other high-level things we want to add here? Alright, if not, then we'll start looking at the high road plan. So I'm just going to reproduce here what's on the web page. So we have 5 lectures. So this is the first talk of the week. So that's going to be a kind of welcome and a bit of a survey. Well, that's currently the idea. The second talk was going to introduce the free energy formula. And phase transitions. Yeah, maybe a bit of a structure of the schedule is necessary to understand. So the way it's currently set up is that each morning there's 1 hour of the high road, and then there's a break, and then there's 1 hour of the low road. So this talk here can presume one talk out of the low road, which would introduce whatever is necessary for that to actually make sense. 3 was, I guess, given what we just said, it should be about demystifying the RLCT, right? But we discussed that, Edmund, maybe you had a different idea for this. Is currently your slot. I don't know if you think it still makes sense to make that about the RLCT.
I mean, probably not narrowly RLCT, but probably following from the previous one, just the free energy formula, including RLCT, and since this is the higher road, perhaps sort of a laundry list of comparison between regular versus singular for not just RLCT, for the errors, the free energy,
right,
and so on.
Yeah, okay. That was the kind of, you were outlining that in my office the other day, right? Yeah. How would you summarize that? Like the path from regular to singular, maybe?
Yeah, I would sort of do kind of an intuition bridge from so example regular model and the various quantity that people are already familiar with and what they represent, and then what we call a minimally singular model, but probably don't use that. So basically regular model, except you need to quotient out a lower dimensional manifold, something like that, and then see how those quantities in regular models, how their meaning change, and then finally introduce the fully singular situation, and a bunch of things breaks, and then we give the correct result in the singular case.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm not sure about the last 2 talks. So currently the 4th talk says Myths, SGD is not Langevin, flatness, Laplace, but that sounds like it kind of fits into what you just said, right?
That's true. I kind of want to stay away from SGD. We know so little about it.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Surely that would be like a question people have, though. It's not something that I have about how SGD fits into the or that model doesn't.
Yeah, that's a broader question, which is how do we address these differences, or the kind of folklore that's out there, and how it differs from what SLT says, and where? I mean, is that a dedicated session, or does that just get inserted all over the place? I think things like SGD is not Langevin. They have to be addressed head on somewhere, because the question of SGD and its relation to the Bayesian posterior will come up, right? And well, it's one thing to say we don't know, but which is true, but just addressing the reason why it's not obviously that SGD is related to the Bayesian posterior, which I guess many people still think, and that's based on the idea that, you know, SGD looks something like a Langevin process with white noise. We know that's not the case, and we have some understanding of why that the noise is not Gaussian. So addressing that somewhere seems like one of the things we should do, even if we can't say much in the positive direction. And I don't know where that should happen.
Actually, dedicating that entire session for the negative direction. So basically, my framing is kind of something like what becomes not surprising in machine learning when you discard the regularity assumption. So that fits into the myth part. And I guess other kinds of myth that is not of that kind, so which is like basically it is still so things like SGD, what does it say? Yeah, so those could sort of fit into the same lecture, but probably with a different conclusion, which is that, well, we don't know, but any other formulation of the problems, particularly about SGD, that depends on that depends on neighborhoods of the true parameters, or neighborhood of optimum being having no singularity, is possibly not correct. That kind of message we could have a stab at it.
Okay. I think I want to go back and add some additional notes on 1, 2, 3, and 4, but okay. 5 at the moment is not really clear. Okay, so what's missing from this board on the left? We've talked about phase transitions, the free energy formula, the generalization puzzle story partly will happen in the low road, where we'll talk about the definition of all those things, and partly in the 2 talks we've just spoken about, 3 and 4. No, don't do that. I guess demystifying the RLCT, or what can we say about singularities, our knowledge? That's
I feel like there will be a debate on epistemology.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's kind of either a tautology or yeah, maybe that's not that's a theme, but not the topic of a talk. So maybe there should be a dedicated talk on either influence of geometry or demystifying the RLCT. How much about these different definitions of the RLCT and so on? I mean, it seems like the third talk, Edmund, you'd have a lot on your plate already, right?
Which means it might sort of spill into the next talk.
Yeah,
So,
but that's...
um,
Yeah, okay.
it's kind of a cluster of things that could be spread over 2 talks.
Yeah, all right. So maybe this final talk is about the role of geometry. That makes sense because we need an introductory lecture on algebraic geometry before this really hits home anyway. So it makes sense to put it at the end. But I'm thinking that maybe this is on the final day. Maybe it's not the best. Maybe it should go earlier. Maybe this what is not surprising should go on the final day. I'm not sure. So here I guess there's a mention of density of states and some of the stuff about RLCT. So on. By the way, Susan, if I remember correctly, you're not there for the first week, right? So I can't stick your name on any of these talks. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be hard to make it for the first week. I could probably make a Friday if
It's not like
need be, but
it's
then
not like
that would
we're-
mean I'm getting.
Yeah, it's not like we're desperate for speakers. I just want to make sure you don't think I'm excluding you or something.
Oh no. Yeah, no, I don't. No, not worry about that. Yeah, but I'll try to contribute a talk for the second week, which I still have to think about. But yeah, this is looking good. I mean, I really think Edmund will probably just need 2 talks
Yeah,
for his
that's
stuff.
right. Okay. Well, there's probably more we could say there, but maybe that's enough for a first pass. Okay, so students like you listening right now, who are learning this stuff, tell me some of the things that you found the most confusing and the most helpful when they were resolved for you in encountering this subject.
I think understanding why the free energy formula is important.
Right, yeah.
Like the Occam's razor analogy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, nothing else? All right, so let's talk about the low road. Okay, currently, this is intro to Bayesian probability. And the driving thing here is what is needed to state or to introduce the free energy formula. So this is going to be pretty condensed, I guess, but needs to cover, whatever it needs to cover. The second talk, on the current schedule is Liam presenting the results in his thesis, which I'll briefly summarize. Okay, so what Liam's thesis shows is that it looks at one hidden layer ReLU networks, and in the reducible case completely analyzes the set of true parameters for some particular true distributions. And then you notice once you do that classification that there's, I mean, as we all know, the invariances in ReLUs are positive scaling and permutation symmetries, but there's one non-obvious one, which has got to do with, well, it's a little bit hard to describe, but you can look at his thesis. I don't know what the name for it that we ended up with was. And as a result of that particular odd degeneracy, there's a kind of special second order phase transition that's associated to it, and Liam found such an example and did MCMC to illustrate that it really happens when you vary the true parameter. So there's two examples, nice small examples, minimal basically. It's you could make, I don't know that there's a proof, but it's pretty plausible that you can't have interesting phase transitions in models with less than 2 hidden nodes. And he illustrates 2. In the case where you have 2 hidden nodes, they're probably the simplest possible second order phase transitions in ReLU networks. And he did a good job of experimentally illustrating that they're there. So I think that's a nice example of, so this is on the second day, right? The first day will, and in the afternoon, wait, maybe not in the afternoon. The low is, yeah, just before lunch. Okay. So the way the schedule would work is on the first day we would have a welcome and a survey in the high road. In the low road there'd be an introduction to Bayesian probability and the statement of the various quantities like BG and GG and all that. Then in the high road in the morning on the second day there would be a discussion of phases, the free energy formula and phase transitions. And then Liam would straight after that give very concrete examples of phase transitions in toy ReLU networks, and basically we completely understand what's going on in those examples, and you actually use the free energy formula to illustrate why what's happening is happening, and otherwise it's quite surprising, right? So you can really see that, well, one of the key phenomena that is surprising if you don't have the free energy formula is that it seems like there should be no way for a phase with non-zero energy to be preferred over one with zero energy, right? That can't happen in the regular case because the higher order terms with the curvature or whatever could affect that, but the d on 2 term is the same for all local minima in the regular case. So it's, unless you understand the free energy formula, it's quite counterintuitive that a phase with non-zero loss could be the preferred one. But once you know the free energy formula, that's not surprising. So I think it's an excellent illustration of the kind of high-level reasoning you can do once you understand the free energy formula. So that's Liam's thesis. Okay, on the current schedule, the third lecture is Zhongtian. Due to visa issues, the visa appointments for Chinese citizens aren't available until September. It looks like Zhongtian won't be able to make it. So this would be a remote talk, and I want to come back to talking a bit more about how we want to do that. The idea here that this would be an introduction to algebraic geometry. Are you there, Zhongtian? Yeah,
yes.
Yep. Okay. What do we need to tell people?
Do you think it it's useful to do some example about blow up, actually, just for illustration, just for the illustration of the resolution of singularity, how to compute our city.
Yeah, my instinct is that we should talk about blow up. I don't know how much to say about. Well, the question is, why are we introducing algebraic geometry? I think it's more to give people the concept of a singularity and what that is than it is to present resolution or blow-ups. But, okay, partly it depends on... it's hard to imagine that in 1 hour you're going to get through the basics about like what makes algebraic geometry different from differential geometry, like the like what a singularity is, and give examples of blow-ups and talk about resolution. Although that's doable in an hour maybe if you stick to examples. Edmund, I think you were saying in the high, so in talks 3 and 4, you were going to systematically make use of some particular examples. Was that right? Did I misremember that?
I think that comment I mentioned before was kind of a blanket strategy that I might be using in high or low. Just basically whenever there is a theorem that requires, in a general case, requires a ton of calculation and verification. So, for example, in that board where you list a ton of prerequisites, my strategy of just getting suppressing all that is to make the point using examples. So we don't need to talk about density of states if we can just calculate what it is in one of them and do the asymptotic expansion to illustrate its leading order behavior and things like that explicitly, and then just hint it and sort of wave at the general one.
Yeah.
So
maybe we have to systematically use the same examples across your 2 talks and Zhongtian's introduction to algebraic geometry then.
okay.
But then those would be monomial examples, or would we do... I mean, another question I have is how to bring in, say, the one hidden layer tan H and the explicit knowledge we have of the polynomials there, or whether we do that at all. I'm a little unsure. On the one hand, it's for someone coming from a mathematical background, it's very, very reassuring to see all that worked out in detail and know at the end of the day there's some polynomials that I could conceivably understand. But on the other hand, it's probably, in itself quite complicated and maybe a bit of a distraction.
I don't have an opinion about that at the moment. Leaning kind of, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just say as a high-level goal, it would be good to coordinate the choice of examples. I mean, yeah, that's the canonical strategy when you only have a small amount of time, is to explain in an example and then just invite the listener to sort of imagine the general case, and probably that has to happen here. Okay, so let's come back, Zhongtian, to what's going to be in that introduction and sort of work backwards from the later points in the low road, maybe. So the 4th talk was going to be... Oh, there's 2 talks on AG. Okay, maybe that's... I don't actually know if that's a good idea. I'll put down what I've put up there already. So this I put as 2... And this was supposed to be about density of states and singularities. I don't know if that... Okay. And finally was going to be a sketch of the derivation of the free energy formula. exactly what that sketch looks like is going to be something we have to discuss quite a bit. But right now, I'd like to get some idea of whether this... Okay, that's the high road and the low road. Now let's shuffle things around and figure out if this is even makes sense. So is it consistent with the high level goal? So the high level goal was to introduce the free energy formula, phases, phase transitions, influence of geometry, demystifying the RLCT. Okay, that's pretty well reflected in the high road, but is the high road sufficiently supported by the low road? Maybe there isn't really much about phase transitions in the low road mathematically, but that will be discussed more in the physics track. Yeah, so I think the main thing the low road needs to do is give a sketch of how the different mathematical ingredients in the grey book come together to prove the free energy formula at some, with some details. What do you think's missing from your high road story that needs to be reflected in the low road story, Edmund? I have a feeling that your talks, Edmund, in the high road are going to be quite technical. And maybe they're actually more like low road talks.
By that you mean there is a lot of explicit examples, calculation?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm curious for what is... I'll just go. So for the what is not surprising, Edmund, are you going to include something about why it's not surprising over parameterization? It is not such a bad thing.
Yes.
So, I was wondering if there will be some SLT low, I guess, examples for that, or I guess you'll just introduce it at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the question is whether or not. Okay, so examples in SLT high can be either toy explicit calculation or I just show numerical results. Or both. So for an explicit singular model, where we calculate the generalization error and see that it depends on the true distribution and then relative with the complexity instead of the just the model complexity, for example.
Right.
Yeah, I think on reflection, the influence of geometry is really a low road talk, and it makes sense to talk about density of states and give the formulas for RLCTs for tanh networks and talk a bit about equivalent polynomials and all that. That would be a natural follow-on from Zhongtian's talk, and that's very much a low road thing. I think the final talk in the high road, well, my proposal would be something like the content of the whichever SLT node it is, the one that's talking about RLCT deltas, like just the very simple-minded calculations where you take the free energy formula and you compare them and you kind of say where a phase transition might happen, like that kind of reasoning, and other similar things where it's not super intense math, but you're actually reasoning with the structure of the theory in a way that is pretty useful potentially. I mean, we don't know that those calculations exactly lead to good predictions yet, but I think I'd like to put as the final high road talk an illustration of how to reason with these tools, whether it's that particular case or something else.
Thinking about this, since in the low road, we are also talking about not going into the 15 different prerequisites, and since we are sort of the illustration and then give the correct assumption in theorem form, but intuition from explicit examples, there is I would think that a lot of the low road thing will look quite a bit like high road. So at the moment, I do agree that what I was proposing for the high road looks like the low road, if by high road we mean discussion of phenomena more than discussion of mathematics.
Yeah. I mean, I think at least your third talk very much fits in the high road, right? Well, I think they both do. I mean, you're not going to be doing calculations or proving anything, at least as I understood your sketches, right?
Yeah.
I guess probably Liam's talk is a little debatable whether it belongs in one or the other, but I do think the other ones probably have a much sort of a clearly more detail oriented in the low road. Okay, maybe Zhongtian, can we come back to your talk? So, what do we say about algebraic geometry?
I think it's not a good idea to like focus on that, like the rigorous math, right? The definition or things like that in 1 hour.
Right.
Then do you still think like? Go ahead.
Well, I think we have to get to a definition of the RLCT, right? It has to be H's and K's
right.
and shit like that at some point, right? Otherwise, it's just too vague, and that's So maybe that's the actual aim of this 1 hour, is to get to the end of actually writing down a definition of the RLCT, and maybe there's a lot in there that isn't properly defined, but yeah, how's this for a proposal? So, I mean,
yes, we can give the definition, then followed by like the example.
Yeah.
To compute it, let's say, what is RLCT for like in the monomial case?
Right. Yeah, okay, so that dictates yeah, I mean, in the book that's just entirely phrased in terms of analytic manifolds and analytic functions, right?
Right.
I'm just wondering, we don't even necessarily need to say what a singularity is to state the resolution theorem. I mean, it's just putting a function in some normal form, right? I guess that, yeah, maybe it's a bit of a misnomer to call that an introduction to algebraic geometry if the potential of something to not be kind of a submanifold is just sort of skated over somehow. So maybe the way to do it is to say, well, a submanifold is a subset where you locally look like the vanishing of some coordinates, but here's an example that's not like that, u squared v squared. And then we can talk about something like u to the 2k as an example of something that's not a submanifold, and then talk about how that how I just don't know. It's challenging to think what is the useful intuition to give somebody.
Or we can just give the definition of the singularity, right? You said the one concerned about the rank of the Jacobian, then we can give simple example.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's just give the definition in terms of
Yeah.
Okay, so then we've talked about analytic functions, resolution. What a singularity is. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Then we can. This can contain some very simple examples, like x to the n or something. And then in the next talk, I'll talk about 10H networks, the polynomial there, why that's singular, and then just give the formulas. I think that's seems pretty solid.
Right.
Okay. Edmund, I don't want to burden you with too many talks, but would you be willing to do that sketch of the derivation as well as the other two talks, or is that too much?
I'm just looking at the schedule and thinking maybe it makes more sense to have more for me to do more low than high to lead towards because so I've given talks to the entire proof of the free energy formula before. So since the low road is not intended to be complete formal calculation and derivation of the free energy formula, and lots of the things that we lots of parts of the proof will be replaced by examples that's illustrative, non-trivial calculation. Perhaps some of the things I'm doing in the high road should be in the low road, and the entire point is to have a reasonably complete derivation of the free energy formula.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm saying yes, I can do that, but perhaps with by moving some of the topics around.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I guess this was also in my mind view. So, okay, so maybe we should take one of the talks out of high, and so I'll put your name here. So maybe that. Maybe the what is not surprising is the least important of these two in the high road. I think the outline you gave to me for the third talk seems very important. I don't think we can skip that.
Yeah, but maybe that talk can be part of the intuition for free energy formula, meaning that's actually the part that I think belong to in the load.
I see. Okay, in that case, we could move Liam's talk maybe, put that in the high road, and in the place of Liam's talk, put another talk by you. How does that sound?
So I guess the parameter that I can play with is basically how much calculation and example and details, I can go into the free energy formula. So yes, I can expand and contract.
Right, so then you've got these 3 talks in the low road, and basically your aim is to just get from the introductory stuff through to the sketch and fit that into 3 lectures, however makes sense. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So I'll put this over here. Yeah, that makes sense anyway. So then the 3rd talk is just illustrating the principles of the 2nd in the high road. Okay, the what is not surprising slot then, I guess, is probably yeah, I feel pretty good about the rest of the slots now. Maybe let's just leave 4 empty for a moment. Yeah, what does everybody think? Does that look pretty solid? I feel better about it now than I did beforehand, so I'm pretty happy. But what's the consensus?
Would we want any really high level algebraic geometry connection? Just because that's kind of like, I don't know, it feels kind of like pivotal field, since that's what I was sold on when I heard about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of difficult.
I'm not an algebraic geometrist, so I don't know how easy that would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I've given many talks over the years about singularities in dynamical systems and how that relates to various things, but I think that's a topic that's going to be addressed in the physics track. So maybe that doesn't entirely cover what you meant, but it sort of maybe covers quite a bit of it. Yeah, I'll think a bit more about that. Thanks, Ben. All right. Okay, so maybe we'll just leave that slot empty for now, unless is there something obvious we should put there? Yeah, I think this final talk here is going to contain some of this complex versus simple. This is some of the subtle stuff that's alluded to in section 7.6 and discovery process in the Green Book and all that. So that will touch a bit on the singularities and knowledge ideas and so on. I guess the 2nd week will be a time to talk about open questions and some of the stuff we don't know about the relation to deep learning and all that. But now that I mention that, maybe there should be a high road talk which really makes the full argument. It's like a self-contained 1-hour argument for why geometry is relevant and why SLT says something interesting, even though we don't know the relation between the Bayesian posterior and SGD.
I was going to say something sort of maybe, I'm guessing most of the audience are going to be alignment people, so they might be wondering maybe something to convince them that they should pay attention to this 10 hours of content. Or
yeah, I guess this takes place on Thursday, so maybe it's a bit late, but yeah, maybe I guess that's right. Maybe this maybe that argument should take place here to some extent.
Well, I can't imagine he's going to say welcome for an hour. We're going to put some stuff in there.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe let's just not worry about that for the moment. All right, that was productive. I guess there's the other track, the physics. Yeah, I don't think we need to talk about that right now. We probably want to put together some optional background reading, so not everybody will be super keen to follow every single detail, but there are some pretty highly motivated people with strong backgrounds who will, so those people will ask for, okay, what are the things I should read before the primer? We should have a think about that, but we don't have to sort that out right now. Okay, I wanted to talk about the online component. So Zhongtian won't be there, so he will speak, I guess, like this probably would be the obvious thing, or the format will be a little awkward, so there aren't like blackboards. The hotel will be in, the talks actually take place in the venue and on movable whiteboards. So hopefully we can get some decent sized ones, and that's not too awkward, but it's not always awesome in my experience. I think we'll be able to get a projector and a what do you call it? A thing to project onto, a white surface. There's a name for this, but
A wall.
a wall. Yeah, no, like the things you pull down from the roof. Okay, I don't know. A screen, yeah, that's probably a good word. So hopefully we'll be able to get one of those, in which case optionally you can present either on the whiteboards or just by writing on an iPad. In that case, obviously the thing you write on the iPad can both be put onto the projector and streamed to those who want to participate remotely. I think it seems likely. I mean, we have 50 people registered to attend, and that's even if we get all the funding, more than we can accommodate. So I think it would be a good idea, not only for Zhongtian, but for all those people who can't attend in person, that there is an online version. So that would be what I would suggest. Any other ideas, or does that sound reasonable? Yeah, okay.
Do we know the venue we're going to be in? Will it be like in the hotel just you mentioned?
That's right, it's the Rose Garden Inn. There's kind of like a common room there. From the photos that Jesse and Alexander showed me, they had some whiteboards that they had set up there.
Okay,
I think from my point of view, it's not an awesome format, but you know, we'll make it work. I think I really hate portable whiteboards. I hate holding them with one hand and drawing on them with the other. I think it's just kind of shit fundamentally. So I think I might actually prefer to write on an iPad and have it projected on a screen. So that I'll be pushing to get that working and good, and that in any case would make the syncing it up with the online audience trivial. So I think probably that's going to be the preferred method of presenting, but we'll see. Okay, yeah, I guess we're running up to the end of time as well. There are other things anybody wants to raise that seem to be missing from what we've discussed so far. So let's reiterate the aim, right? Like this wasn't for PhDs in pure math intention at the beginning. Maybe it's evolved in that direction, but this was supposed to be for somebody wanting to use SLT or get optionally deeper into SLT, but fundamentally interested in applying it to another area of science, whether that's alignment or something else. Are we actually achieving that, or have we just drifted off into talking about the fun things that we care about? All the smiley faces mean the answer is yes. I don't know. I feel kind of fine about the first board, although there's a lot about phases and phase transitions. Maybe that's good, but maybe it's too much. Yeah, I think maybe talk 4 should be.
I think that talk 4 should definitely be or at least somewhere in the high road should be a value proposition of SLT talk.
Yeah.
So the kind of the one that I was suggesting before, which is sort of intuition / folklore correction, is one of them. But then that's kind of in a negative direction. But something in the positive direction should be there as well. My mental picture of that is like something about an analogy of like the easing theory to the understanding of magnets or something like that. Or we want a theory that not just correct existing theory, but also but also provide extra things to study. For example, phase transitions is kind of the prime example of that. But maybe we should have a few more, and maybe that talk could be a little, just a slightly more speculative than the other talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, what about the low road? I mean, by design, this is supposed to be a bit more for the people wanting some meat. Yeah, I think I feel pretty happy about that. I want people to walk away having some clue of where the free energy formula comes from and how the derivation ties together all these things. I think we'll get there. All right. Unless there are any more comments, I guess we can wrap up. Blackboards in hotel. Yeah, you show me the hotel with blackboards, and I will show you a lot of mathematicians' money. All right, I think that's it. Thanks everybody. I think that helped. I'll update the webpage and we can take it from there.